What type of entrepreneur are you? It's an important piece of information to know as you're growing your business.
In today's episode, we're going to chat on the two common archetypes, the visionary and the integrator.
Are you frustrated by a lack of momentum in your business? Tired of putting in long hours doing what everyone says you should and still not making money? Sounds like you're ready for Lifestyle Builders. We'll help you get back on track, taking action, and seeing results. Head over to joinlifestylebuilders.com today to get started. All right. Throwing a little Matthew McConaughey. Gotcha.
I see that. Let's see. Go a little Wolf of Wall Street here.
Oh God! Now we started it. Okay, take it down a notch. Today we're chatting on a pretty important topic. This has been, if you've been in the online business world, you may have heard these two terms thrown around: visionary, integrator. They actually come from a book, of course, a book that Tom has read.
I was going to say, have you read this book?
Nope.
It's not one of your 5 books that you've read.
But I think the basis of what they wanted to do in this book was really help entrepreneurs understand more about themselves, because most entrepreneurs tend to have a skill set that serves them well in one area, but not necessarily others.
Yeah, well, and really where I think this came from is you've probably heard that, like, as the entrepreneur, you wear all the hats. Mm-hmm. And as the entrepreneur, you're often like Superman or Superwoman. And oftentimes, I think what these guys hit on was that just because you're the founder or the entrepreneur, there's often these like two conflicting roles that are managed very different, mm-hmm. that have very different personality types. And a lot of founders end up getting in trouble because they're like at war with themselves on trying to balance these two. And they're usually much better at one over the other.
Well, and I think too, if you don't know what those differences are, it's often hard to know what gaps you're even trying to fill when you're looking for support. So you're hiring and you have you're blind hiring when you don't know, here's the area where I am best. So I need to look for somebody in that other area, and that's going to be a better hire.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So first off, we talked about a little bit in the intro, but where did these terms come from?
So have we even talked about the terms?
I did say visionary integrator in there somewhere.
Okay. Yeah. So they're visionary integrator. They really came from Gino Wickman, originally in a book called Traction. And just funny story about Traction when we get into it. I was at a conference years ago, and it was the last day, and I was talking to this guy in the lobby, like I always do, just talk to random people in the hallway at conferences. And I'm explaining just how we work with entrepreneurs and a lot of what we see in the market and the approach we take. And he's like, "Oh, so you've read the book Traction?" And I'm like, "No, actually, I haven't." I said, I've heard of it. I think it's on my list of 300 books I have to read. But he starts chuckling and he goes, "Read it, and then let's chat in a week." And essentially the reason he was laughing is because the approach that I was talking about, 80 or 90% of it is very aligned with Traction. Mm-hmm. So the book originally was basically talking about the author Gino Wickman. He created what he calls the EOS, the Entrepreneur Operating System. And it was basically a way to think about and run an entrepreneurial business. And so one of the pieces in there is he talks about people, and he talks about an accountability chart. Mm. And he introduced these two terms, visionary and integrator. And essentially the premise of it was a visionary is the big picture thinker. They're really looking at where the vision, where the business is going to go. And then the integrator is more of the day-to-day, pulling the vision together into the action plan. Mm-hmm. And it was talked about in Traction, but then there was so much interest and questions around this that he actually
had to write another book,
a follow-up book called Rocket Fuel, where he really deep dove into those two roles, figuring out which one you are, and then basically figuring out how to hire your counterpart. Because as he describes, and it's very true, it's a challenge to play both those roles.
Mm-hmm. And it's a challenge to build your business when you don't have both those roles filled.
Yep.
All right. So correct me if I'm wrong, but the premise of the book is that most entrepreneurs fit into one or the other.
Yeah. So actually most entrepreneurs fall into the visionary role.
Gotcha.
And I think, don't quote me on this. I think the ratio was like, for every entrepreneur that's a visionary, they're like 6-1. So 6, like if you're gathering those entrepreneurs, the majority of them are going to be visionaries. And there's a lack, to be honest, of integrators. So if you look at a lot of businesses, and we work with a lot of businesses, a lot of them have visionaries, and then they end up falling apart because they don't have that integrator counterpart, and the back end of the business is actually a big mess. So it's been really interesting to read through these books and then to see in reality a lot of this stuff really coming to life.
Yeah. And I just wanted to point this out while we're talking about this. Of course, I went and took the assessment, and apparently I'm neither. So I just want to put this out there that, not everyone in the quote unquote business world may score high enough on the assessment to be considered one or the other. That doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't. Obviously not, and every assessment is 100% accurate.
Well, I was going to say 2 things. One, I'm not surprised at all that you didn't score on either of those based on us working together. And 2, I don't necessarily want to derail this conversation, but we do have a follow-up episode talking about some additional roles beyond these 2. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation in that episode around where people fit in some of that.
I am too. All right. So let's break down these 2 archetypes. First, we're going to go with the visionary.
So when we talk about visionary, and like I said, this is where most entrepreneurs fall, what I want you guys to think about is that it's that big picture thinker. The visionaries are usually the people that start companies, because what a visionary does is look at the future and they're like, I want the world to look this way, or I see this problem that exists that I want to solve. And so they create that future vision, hence visionary. And then they're basically saying, I want to solve that problem. I want to create a company that does that. And then they're usually starting the company and working on that mission or on that vision and mission. Yeah.
And so if you are looking out there at businesses, most of the time, the person who's the visionary is going to be the CEO, the founder, the president, the person who's the front runner, like the face of the business, is typically the visionary.
Yeah, and it's important that you point that out, because one of the things I've seen a lot of people bring questions to us on is they're like, well, I've never seen the role of a visionary in a company. So like, what roles does that relate to? So like you said, usually people holding those 3 roles are what tend to be the visionary within a company.
Yeah, and they also are typically more aligned with the sales and marketing piece, because they are the ones that have this big vision. They know what the problem is that they want to solve. They know who they want to help. So that kind of sets them, most of the time, they're in that role of like selling their vision to other people.
Yeah, well, that's really, the reality, because most people end up coming either from like a sales and marketing background or like an operations background. And to your point, oftentimes a visionary is going to be really good at selling that vision, because they have to get their team members sold on that vision. They have to get their customers sold on that vision. And depending on if they're getting investors, they have to get investors sold on that vision. So they're usually really good at the sales piece. And usually where they're lacking is like in the operations, in the structure, in the systems, all of that.
Yeah. And I know that there's probably a lot of people out there listening to this and nodding along. Like, you see it all the time in the funny memes and like people posting in groups or at events, just like, oh my gosh, I have so many ideas. So many ideas. And they're all amazing ideas, but now I don't know which one to do or start first. And that's really where you find the gap in being a visionary, is that trying to take all of those things that you have as ideas, or trying to take that to the next step and actually like put a project in place, is where they often struggle.
Yeah. Well, and if you've taken some personality tests and stuff, you likely already have a good idea on which role you fall into. But typically visionaries, like if we're talking about like a Covey, personality test or index, usually visionaries are fast start. So they're really good at coming up with the ideas and getting going. They often struggle with like follow through and with the execution of those ideas. And this is exactly why we're talking about these two roles, because oftentimes the person really good at starting it is not really good at finishing it. And on the flip side, the person that's really good at the details and finishing it often doesn't have the ideas, or, you know, can't get it started, but once it's started, they can take it. The final thing I want to just talk about with visionaries is that often the way they think is based on emotions. So they get, like, when you hear like passion and stuff like that, visionaries are often really passionate about the idea or the change they want to see in the world. So oftentimes they'll make decisions on what they do based on emotion, not necessarily based on like logic or data or any of that, which is also why having a counterpart of an integrator really helps, because now you're taking that passion, but you're also, you know, aligning it with data and with, you know, the plans to say, okay, well, how do we actually make that thing happen?
Yeah. And it's funny because I'm laughing internally while we're discussing these, because it's like you're describing yourself in some ways, in a lot of ways, because you are the visionary. But like a lot of other CEOs and people in the business world, you've actually had to cross over both lines, and you play the role of the integrator as well because of your background, because of the logical part of your mind. You actually can do that well too. So I want to dive into the integrator piece, because what they really do is take the visionaries' goal, their mission that they've put out there, and they're able to break that down into like a roadmap and start implementing that in the business.
Yeah, you know, like I love that term roadmap. We use that all the time. And this is where really the rubber meets the road, like pun intended. But yeah, it's really like the best way I can describe this is they are usually the glue that keeps everything together. Because when you go into like entrepreneurial companies, you get in there and you're like, how is this thing even running? Like, how do we make it work? And it's almost like just in time. It's like when something comes up, we deal with it. And especially if you're a fast growth company, things are constantly breaking. And this is where you then really need that integrator to be able to help, you know, put systems in place, put projects in place, put numbers in place so that you can actually run a business based on data and not just based on a visionary's, you know, gut feel. Because the other thing that often happens with visionaries is that their teams feel like whiplash because they're constantly shifting directions, and the team's like, I thought we were going this way. Why are we going this way? Like, and it's a big challenge to keep up. So those integrators are so important. And as we talked about earlier, there's usually a lot less of them. So, you know, if you're an integrator, if you're really good at this role, and, you know, we had a previous podcast interview with Natalie, and the big thing she was talking about was actually training people to be integrators,
because they're needed everywhere.
Yeah, and it's such a great niche because there are so many visionary entrepreneurs that haven't found their integrator counterpart, and they're struggling as a result.
Yeah, and I mean, you will see integrators in pretty much every successful company. Most of the time, they're playing the role of like the COO or the general business manager, or obviously we talked about this in our last couple episodes, the project manager. That is who is really helping you bring your vision down to earth, put it into action, and have things moving on a day-to-day basis. They're dealing with all the details so that you don't have to, so that you can stay in your lane and, you know, your business is doing what it needs to do to grow.
Yeah, and as you guys are probably kind of picking up as we're talking about this, there's a very important relationship between the visionary and the integrator. And because, I mean, this requires a lot of communication, because what that integrator is trying to do is to get that visionary to take the idea out of their head and articulate it. And I've worked with a lot of visionary leaders that when I talk to them one-on-one, I'm like, man, you guys have this, and I can't wait to see what we can do with the company. But oftentimes what happened was that visionary leader didn't have an integrator to be able to pull it out, to be able to ask the right questions, and to be able to frame it so that that message can then be sold not only to everyone on the team, but then, because oftentimes what happens is the leader will go out and be like, this is where we're going and this is what's coming up. And everyone gets excited. And then the question is like, well, how do we get there?
What do we do next?
And if that visionary leader doesn't help the team members get a path, they're going to be set up for failure. So this is where the integrator then really has to work and sometimes even challenge that visionary to get the goals and the vision down into projects, down into data, down into who do we need and what does everything have to look like so that we can actually execute and work towards that vision and make it a reality.
Yeah, and let's talk about this ratio difference. If you are in fact one of the fewer people out there who is an integrator, you're an operations whiz. Like that's your zone of genius. So a lot of times integrators, entrepreneurs that are integrators will really struggle with the sales and marketing piece. So it's not that they don't have the idea, like they obviously had the idea to start the business and it may be doing well, but a lot of times they get stuck when they have to take things to the next step and really push out into the sales and marketing and like long-term vision for what their company is going to be. So what does somebody that is an integrator do when they are kind of stuck at that point?
Yeah. So, just to kind of recap what you said, usually when you go into a business, you're always going to have one bottleneck or one problem. And for the business that's run by a visionary, usually it's that the business is growing, but it's not organized and things are falling apart. Mm-hmm. And you may be losing customers. You may be, falling into some of those buckets. If you go into a company that has an integrator leading it, usually the company is really well organized. There's systems, like everything's good, but they're not growing as fast because they don't have the expertise or really that big vision to be able to sell and to be able to do more. So really what we're looking at here is first identifying which one you are, and based on that, then which bottleneck or which issue your company is currently facing as it looks to grow. Then you're looking to basically hire in your counterpart and somebody to help you with that. And in a lot of cases, what ends up happening is you got the visionary, they need to hire the integrator. Mm-hmm. It's a lot less common to have somebody that's the integrator and they need to hire the visionary. It is a challenge in that case because regardless of which role you're trying to bring on, got to make sure that you guys are aligned and, like I said, can really work together because you're going to be challenging each other. You're going to be having those hard questions and hard conversations. But it's just important to make sure that you realize which role you're in, and then you start seeking out who is the right type of person that I can then fill that other role with.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't happen often, but it does happen because you'll often see a company that's doing well, they will go and hire in a CEO who is aligned with the company values and can kind of take the vision and the mission that they have and take it to the next level.
Yep. And so, like, just an example of this one company that I was working with, and this commonly happens. So people get really good at their skill set at a job, and then they start a business. And oftentimes when they start that business, they're in like the quote unquote technician role. They're actually doing the work. And there's been some companies I've worked with that really like doing the work. They wanted to start their own company for a variety of reasons, but they don't enjoy like the big picture and they're not thinking that way. So they've actually gone in and hired a CEO to drive the growth of the company and to play that because they wanted to sit in the integrator role and kind of run the business day to day, but they wanted somebody else to be able to take it and think about how to grow it in the future. So if you are in that integrator role, consider hiring a CEO. Like a lot of people are like, well, no, it's my business. Why would I hire a CEO? What you got to realize is that you're still the business owner, but you need to figure out what roles you excel in and which ones you don't. And you want to fill those alternate roles. And sometimes that might be the CEO.
And I mean, that's something to think about too, as a visionary, that, there is the possibility that you could go and be the visionary for someone else's company. If there was something that aligned with you or a mission that you found that you just fell in love with, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to start your own business doing it. You might be better off finding a company who's already trying to fulfill that mission and stepping in and saying, hey, I can help you with that. Here are my skills.
Yeah, well, we talked on a previous episode about,
working for an entrepreneur.
should you work for an entrepreneur? And a lot of it was more from like the roles perspective and kind of getting your foot in the door. But this is definitely an alternate take on that, where you're very visionary and you're going to a company that already has like solid operations, and you're looking to then go and take that business to grow.
Well, you see that a lot in like the startups industry. Like there's so many startups out there, and they're falling into this problem of like, okay, we've got this great idea and we're growing and now we're stuck. You'll often see startups are looking for, hey, we need somebody to come in and be the CEO, or hey, we need somebody to come in and be the COO and help us take this thing to the next level.
Yeah, and a lot of times once an entrepreneur has built their own businesses, and then oftentimes either they've got them to a place where they're not spending a lot of time, or they've got them to the place where they've sold them and now they're looking for the next thing. Oftentimes they'll go and step into a role like this because they don't necessarily want to start it from scratch, but they know that if there's a solid company that they see an opportunity in the market, they can then take it and really help it, fulfill that gap and fulfill that opportunity.
Yeah. I like it.
Is that exhausting for you?
A little bit, maybe. I don't know.
All right. So we talked about the two roles today. We kind of gave a little bit of an overview on each. What's your action for people from here?
My action is going to be pretty obvious. If you have not already taken the assessment from Rocket Fuel, go head on over there. We will, of course, put the link in the show notes at wearelifestylebuilders.com/139. But if you haven't yet taken it, go over and just take the assessments and see what they say and learn a little bit more about yourself so that you can move forward from that point. You're not in that state of confusion or I don't know what I am.
Yeah, well, I mean, it all starts from, where am I at now? So my action is going to be, once you do that, I then want you to be the visionary, even if you're not, and look forward in the future and basically say, what do I want? What role do I want to sit in? And then what does that mean for, the role that I need to hire? And just think about what that would look like in the ideal situation for you, because what that can then do is help you to then say, okay, here's where I'm at. Here's where I want to be. And then what are some of the key steps that I can take to start to identify and then eventually hire that role into your company?
Yeah. And speaking of that task, if that's something that you're feeling really out of your comfort zone with and you'd like a little help after you've taken the assessment to identify where you're at, where your business is at, and what your next step should be, I would highly suggest you jump on a call with this guy over here, and he can help you. He can walk through, help you get really, really clear on, okay, this is where my business is at. This is where I want it to go. And then based on this assessment, here's the spot that I'm filling. Do I need to hire somebody? Do I need to build some things out here so that I can continue to grow my business to where I want it to go? And you can do that at
tomandariana.com/apply. And I'll just say with that, a lot of people that come to me and that we work, through this with, say, well, I tried to do it for a while and I try to figure it out on my own. And what we often don't realize is that we're often too close to it, especially when we're trying to evaluate these roles and find the counterpart.
Yep.
And usually what we can do is really help you hone in on who is that right fit and that right counterpart for you, so that you can sit in the seat you want and so that you can build the business you want to create the life that you want.
To sit in the seat you want. I like it.
Boom.
All right. And obviously we did talk about a couple books today, but if you are looking to get a deeper understanding around the visionary integrator roles, would highly suggest you pick up the book Rocket Fuel. That is Tom's bookshelf of today.
Yeah. And I'm also going to recommend Traction. And I would actually recommend that you guys read Traction first, because Traction is going to give you the 30,000 foot view and help you understand kind of the whole entrepreneur operating system. And then Rocket Fuel will help you hone in more specifically on the visionary, the integrator role, and a lot more details and nuances around that.
Speaking of Traction, make sure not to miss next week's episode because we're going to dive into those other roles that we just talked about.
Absolutely.
All right, you guys, it's been another great episode with Tom and Ariana, your hosts and lifestyle builders.
And as always, I want you guys to remember that it's your life, your business, your way. We'll see you next time.
Bye. Hey, we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you know another entrepreneur who may benefit from hearing this show, we would so appreciate you being a good friend and sharing it with them. Are you dreaming of a life of financial freedom and more time to spend with your loved ones? Want to build your business to support that dream? You need Lifestyle Builders, a mentorship program designed to meet you where you are and give you strategic and custom guidance so you can build the business you need for the life you crave. Become a lifestyle builder at joinlifestylebuilders.com. Are you a Lifestyle Builders podcast fan? We'd love to hear from you. Head on over to tomandariana.com/iTunes and leave us a review.